Madison College, which, as I mentioned before, is a prestigious residential college at Michigan State. So I'll turn it over now to Professor El-Rayes.
Thank you, Dr. Khalil, and thanks you to everyone who's participating, coming in, the panelists. I think we're still waiting for Professor Dr. Iqbal. He is the first in the order of the flyer, which I will go with, but we can wait, maybe just 1 minute. If not, we'll move. I'll introduce the rest of the panelists, and hopefully he can join us soon.
Yeah, and I did see him earlier, so hopefully he'll be
you
here.
did?
Yeah, oh, actually, he's right here. Perfect timing.
Oh, I don't see it. Where?
Oh, he's just arrived. Yes, there he is.
Excellent.
Yes.
Okay, so maybe I should start. Thank you, everyone, for attending, for our panelists and for our audience. So the order, we'll start with the papers. Each panelist will have 15 minutes. Because I'm not sure if people will be watching the screen as they are reading their paper. As we are getting closer to the 15 minutes, I'll give you a 2 minutes warning. So please be, in a very, I'll unmute myself and say 2 minutes warning. 2 minutes, and then we will have about 5 minutes for my general comments on the papers, and we will open it to the general public. Without further ado, I'll start with introducing each panelist as they're presenting before they present their paper. I'm following the order on the flyer, so we'll start with Dr. Basit Iqbal. Dr. Iqbal is assistant professor in the Department of Anthropology at McMaster University. Previous publications have appeared or are forthcoming in the journals QPAR, Method and Theory in the Study of Religion, Anthropological Theory, the Journal of Religion, and Muslim World. His book, Manuscript in Progress, based on fieldwork with refugees and aid workers in Jordan and Canada, is titled God Grant Us Relief, Tribulation and Refuge After the Syrian Uprising. The floor is yours, Dr. Iqbal.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you to the organizers and to the audience and to the participants. And I've learned a lot over the past yesterday and today. The paper I'm presenting today, it's an excerpt from a longer project of something that I've co-written with a friend of mine who works on Orthodox Christian activists and monks in Lebanon. And so together we try to trace how the idiom of Ghurba offers a common language for multiple forms of contemporary destruction in this shared vocabulary of Eastern Christianity and Islam. I'll come back a little bit to some of the theoretical implications of what we're trying to do after I guess presenting a couple of ethnographic scenes and giving some brief commentary on them. So my own part of that paper contrasts two Project Gaji in North Jordan and Northwest Canada, that is two of the lands of estrangement, or Bilad al-Ghurba, to which Syrian refugees have fled in their displacement. In the former site, various traditional practices may gain the traction necessary to rehabilitate political economic suspicion and social abandonment, while in the latter site, and despite or maybe because of political economic relief in a complicated way, such ethical practices in fact fail to redress the desiccation of communal forms. My ethnographic fieldwork, which I draw on here, engage Muslim projects of Syrian refugee support and settlement in both Jordan and Canada. Over 15 months in 2018 and 2019. In particular, I attended theology classes in a refugee camp in the Jordanian desert and a summer camp for refugee children held by Muslim groups in Edmonton. I observed Ramadan dinners held in tent settlements at the Jordan-Syria border and financial literacy trainings for newcomer families in Canada. Across these different sites, interlocutors of varying political and religious commitments regularly named multiple states of displacement and statelessness, this conference's subtitle, with reference to the Arabic root Ghurba, which lexically means to pass away or depart, to become hidden or withdraw, to become obscure or difficult, to cross a limit of exorbitance of good or of ill. And so Ghurba means, to become a stranger, and the Gharib is the alien or the foreigner, and so hence Ghurba itself being foreign, strange, and exiled. Philosophically, Ghurba presses in on the coherence of space and time, on experience and expectation. I kind of on a very similar note, I appreciated Dr. Perez's presentation yesterday, speaking of alienation in a similar register. Ghurba provides a recursive idiom of estrangement which cannot be easily delimited, naming rather the experience of crossing a limit, marking a separation in oneself and undermining the certitude of any experience. So the term gharib names the stranger in a far land, but also in a different register, perhaps the same register, also the sojourner in this life whose ultimate destination is the other world, or Dar al-Akhirah. Within the archives of classical and modern Arabic literature, Ghurba is a central topic and mood of exilic poetry. Within the archives of theological traditions, Ghurba names the ambivalence of worldly relations, so both distance and proximity from divine grace and mercy. These long poetic and theological iterations and itineraries of Ghurba intertwine worldly and existential loss. So, and again, I'll return to some of these broader questions if and as there is time. So the first ethnographic scene that I'm mostly describing, not really presenting in full detail, is under the heading of abandonment, and is situated at an orphanage in North Jordan, whose steward, whom I called Bilal, and who is a key interlocutor in my book manuscript, was once an imam at a mosque in South Syria. After escaping across the border from regime forces hunting him, he lived in a refugee camp for 2 years until hearing that an Islamic charity was looking for a caretaker to live at one of the orphanages it supported. He held evening lessons for the children there every other day, so memorizing the Quran, studying hadith, and he hoped that these lessons would provide a basis for them to encounter the fear and the suspicion which he saw to dominate life in both Syria and Jordan. The neighbors were initially fearful of us, he explained, being new here, newcomers, and suspicious about how our presence would further drain the economy. And we need to offer these lessons because, speaking frankly, people's thoughts have been polluted in Syria. On the one hand, we have rebel groups declaring others to be apostates, and on the other hand, we have the regime's brutal oppression. So our effort here is to give the children a different approach. And so these evening classes took place under a metal trellis in the orphanage courtyard, where on the warm evening I'm describing, there lingered the faint scent of jasmine, which he told me he planted there so the children would associate its fragrance with their lessons. After a short lecture on prophetic mercy, he turned to practical ethics. We're here as Syrians, as strangers. This is a proverb for us, Ya Gharib kun adib, right? We need to be good neighbors. Recall the hadith about the smell of food, cooking, annoying those who aren't eating. Invite others to eat, be generous. He continued on. After the lesson, he sent some of the boys to clean up the square in front of the building to gather any rubbish that had fallen. He led them laughing in a one-footed race from one side of the square to the other as I sat under the trellis and finished my notes. Despite the incapacitations of poverty and inflation, he could still make the space to inculcate a sense of religious and ethical obligation. He implied that without the ground of moral community, ethics is suspended. So although he couldn't affect the material economic conditions of the families in the orphanage, which also included his own family, he dedicated his evenings to such lessons in order to kind of try to recreate or recompose that moral community. A year later, he sent me a document he prepared, its funding fast depleting as the war continued. The Islamic charity that paid the utilities for that building had shut down another one of its orphanages. He was anxious that their building would be next. The Jordanians think the war is over and that Syrians should return, he explained, but the situation is far more complicated. He wrote that life under the regime was still nightmarish and that conditions in Jordan were still desperate. He sent a series of suggestions to the charity and circulated them to anyone who he thought might help stave off the threatened closure. These appeals emphasized the religious value of the lessons he offered there. In doing that, he hoped that their value would have traction outside the field of ethics and character from which that value was drawn. So he risked the instrumentalization of the work of ethics in the service of conditions necessary to build ethics, still asserting that the work of time is therapeutic on one's neighborly relations and that the religious tradition can help rehabilitate a common life. So that was scene one. Scene two is in Canada, where the interlocutor I'm calling Shams is grateful, of course, for the refuge granted him and for the rule of law and for the social norm of security. But when I met him, he's an accomplished Iraqi calligrapher. After the evening prayers at a storefront mosque in Edmonton, he was also struck by how deep the estrangement of exile ran. A community initiative celebrates him as a success story of Canadian refugee sponsorship. His work has been shown in a gallery at City Hall and at a local public library and so on. But the problem is that despite his announcements at local mosques and at art stores, there isn't really an audience for calligraphy in his new city, or at least not enough that a calligrapher with 30 years of experience could be commissioned for regular projects, and he still needs to feed his family. And so he was working at an Arab restaurant, and a few weeks before he gained his Canadian citizenship, he commented, "Only today did I realize that my studies, which I pursued under war and bombing and so on, have blown away in the wind in Canada. That is exile." We sat in the antechamber of the improvised prayer hall, and I asked about his calligraphy. In reply, he launched into an impromptu lecture about how at one level calligraphy is just one art form among others, but it was historically sanctified through its association with the Quran. The different scripts have distinct purposes, he continued, which he tried to explain in his workshops, but ultimately it's through the practice of calligraphy, right? Not its theory, how to hold oneself, how to adjust one's pen, that he found calm. And by that relaxation, he didn't just mean respite from a busy schedule, but the calming or the sakina of his soul. So the aesthetic practice of calligraphy for him is a mode of engaging the divine word. He would perform ablutions before sitting down with his reed, as he would for prayer. But the distress and estrangement of exile, of Ghurba, was not just about his distance from his homeland or about his redoubled displacement. Instead, it touched every aspect of his new life, even those communal spaces which he thought would have offered some solace. "There's no warmth here," he said, "no mercy, no rahmah. It's hard to breathe in exile. You have to learn everything again, even how to walk when snow comes. It feels like you're between two fires. And if you don't melt, if you don't form into Canadian culture, people look at you differently. Even most of the mosques here make you feel the deprivation in your spirit. The Muslims are successful and many are wealthy, but the mosques don't give the same sense, ma'na, the same feeling of tranquility that they would in Iraq or Syria. So even the forms of religious community and ethical cultivation here no longer deliver their same quality of rest or ease. They've been emptied out, despite, or maybe in fact because of, the wealth and the production of the Muslims." His bitter complaint offered an image with an apocalyptic frame, recalling hadiths in which the Prophet foretold the hollowness of religious forms. "There will come upon the people a time," in one of these hadiths, "in which nothing will be left of Islam other than the name, and nothing left of the Quran but the vestiges of writing. The mosques then will be occupied but desolate of guidance." So the mosques are indeed busy, they're bustling with activity, but Shams shook his head. They act as tax shelters, offering nothing to your poverty of spirit. The work of rehabilitation, then, is condensed into the gestural movements of his bamboo pen as he practices and tries to teach others, but not the communal spaces which claim the name of religion. So these two scenes have been hastily presented without detailing their context or following these men's fuller engagements with Islamic traditions of authority and practice. But what strikes me still is the contrast in the role they give religion in the ameliorative work of rehabilitation. In the scene of Islamic pedagogy at the orphanage in the Syrian borderlands, Ghurba is born of spatial dislocation, through a displacement from the cultural and the religious context that would allow for the integrity of the community. Here, the religious tradition does offer the ethical resources to disarticulate oneself from the effects of destruction, and so to emplace oneself again. The emphasis is not on a kind of production to counter destruction, but a slower, more intimate rehabilitation, which is possible through recourse to the ethical and religious tradition, but it requires time to take effect. In contrast, for the Iraqi calligrapher in Edmonton, Ghurba emerges not simply from a spatial displacement, but from a kind of temporal disjuncture. That is to say, here there is life, thank God, but even the forms of communal relations that once were viable are not sufficient to the work of rehabilitation. Here, production and material upbuilding, the bustling mosques and their construction projects, in fact, only intensify the internal destruction. The wealth and leisure of the new alien community are themselves desiccating. They cut out the ground of ethical relation. I should say that I and my friend came to this project in part with through a concern with how religion is often framed as a kind of cultural resource in contexts of displacement. It's often offered as a source of resilience, but what that resilience means and how the religion is drawn upon, to effect that resilience, all that remains quite obscure. And so we're trying to understand how that happens and different limits that are already internal to these traditions. What is that topography? What does Ghurba mean in these different contexts? Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, 1 minute, please.
1 minute, perfect. So in doing so, we're also inspired through a kind of rereading of Ibn Khaldun's Muqaddimah, which insists on the historical contiguity of different scales and registers, which he articulates a topology of soul, community, and world, which are always already shadowed by a kind of destructive undoing from within. And so the forms of tradition here become authorized by and purified by an experience of Ghurba in the binding of communal forms with the nothing, with an experience of being out of joint, also the advantage of the afterlife. And so Ghurba here articulates different powers of destruction and production, throwing open the conditions of religious traditions, transmission, and inheritance. Ghurba is no longer defined by its distance from and longing for a homeland alone, but becomes also a broader idiom of contemporary experience common across geographical borders. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Iqbal. Our second presenter is Dr. Hossein Ghazizadeh, who is a researcher of human rights and Shia social history at Tehran University. His paper is titled Citizenship and Statelessness in Islamic Jurisprudence and Legal Status of Non-Shia Muslim Refugees. Now, Professor Ghazizadeh has a recording of his paper. Would you like me to play it, Dr. Ghazizadeh?
Hi, dear Mr. Thank you for your presentation. Yeah, I prefer to show my film. Thank you.
I will. Okay, so I will do that right now. Shared sound and optimize video clip.
Greetings, everybody. dear participant in the 15th Conference of Islamic Studies, University of Michigan. I'm very happy to present my article in the conference, and I hope it will be noticed by the esteemed audience. My article about citizenship and the statelessness in Islamic jurisprudence with Shiite reaction, a case study of jurisprudential and legal status of non-Shiite Muslim refugees. In the Islamic view based on the Quran, the issue of refuge has been taken into consideration by institution of Istiman, and the verses of Quran explicitly allow the Muslims to become acquainted with Islamic teachings by sheltering non-Muslim. But in this article, what it considered in the Shiite view of phenomenon of statelessness and how much the concept of citizenship has been explored in Shiite jurisprudence and law. Studies showed that the basic concept of citizenship in Islamic, in religious regarding is based solely on Islam and the homeland. In the modern sense, it has no specific geographical boundaries. The universal view and Islamic Shiite-centered belief has caused Shiites in the past and even now, following the tradition of the prophets Ahlul Bayt, to treat immigrations, whether they have a specific citizenship or statelessness, with kindness and the Islamic concept of compassion. Accept them in their community. The article explains the basis of this attitude and the examples of the practice of Shiite imams. The international human rights law and nationality and statelessness has developed throughout the adoption of a number of international and regional instruments during the 20th century. They indicated the effect of a statelessness status of human rights protection in beginning to receive attention at the international level. There is developing relationship between involuntary changing of national and stateless. The proposition takes into account the current Shiite view, and Islamic human rights instruments takes to the account the current Shiite view and Islamic human rights. Among human, international law did not impose any limits on states and avoid human statelessness until the 1930 Hague Conventions and Conflict of Nationality Laws and the 1930 Hague Protocol on Statelessness. The article shall examine how these Islamic human rights instruments signify a shift away from the primacy of state sovereignty, of nationality and statelessness. In doing so, it concludes Islamic human rights law impose limits on state sovereignty and nationality. Today, under Islamic view of international law, the powers of a state to confer its nationality and withdraw nationality is not unlimited. Basis of Islamic view of international law limits impose the state sovereignty of conferral and withdrawal of nationality would help to reduce statelessness among human. During the centuries, during the 20th century, regional or international instruments in the field of developing of statelessness prevention has found relevant international instruments, including the 19th century's Hague Convention concerning the conflict of citizenship laws, 1930 Hague Protocol concerning the special case of statelessness, 1951 Convention relating to the status of refugees, 1954 Convention relating to the status of individuals' statelessness, 1961 Convention of the reduction of statelessness, 1967 Convention in particular citizenship of married women, and the 1979 Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. Two regional documents related to legal statelessness, including the 1969 American Convention of Human Rights and the 1997 European Convention on Nationality, Citizenship, and political, spiritual relationships that connect a person to a particular state. Citizenship is a political relationship because it arises from the sovereignty of the state, and it's the state that determines who are its citizens or what the conditions must be for being a citizens of the state. Citizenship is the source of enjoyment of rights and duties, full enjoyment of political, social, economic, and it includes persons subject to a state. And if persons are stateless or stateless, they are not subject to any state and have no national law to govern their personal situation. They will be deprived. They will be deprived of their rights that exist for the citizens of a state. Of course, lack of citizenship will not be licensed for governments to violate human rights of citizens. Among the factors that cause the undesirable phenomena of a stateless, we can mention the deprivation of citizenship due to punishment, asylum, immigration, of deprivation of citizenship due to the intention of immigrants. Deprivation of citizenship is a unilateral act by the state of person that is done in return for an act or omission of citizen. The result of deprivation of citizenship is nothing but the creation of an international dilemma, as statelessness. Deprivation of citizenship was accepted as a punishment for the holder of accurate citizenship in the past, but is now not accepted at all by the international community, especially if it's original citizenship. Today, most countries accept the deprivation citizenship is a violation of citizenship rights, and some countries prohibit deprivation of citizenship in their law. In Iranian law, deprivation of citizenship was mentioned in Article 981 of Civil Code, and its note, which was removed from Civil Code in 1991 according to the amendment law. The Iranian legislature has amended in Article 41 and Article 42 the Constitution that citizenship is an inalienable right for every Iranian, and that government has limited authority to deprive Iranians of their citizenship. Although both Islamic jurisprudence and international sources have recognized certain rights for refugees, the concept of asylum and definition of refugees in Islamic differ from those of international instruments. Phenomena of asylum analogies have a broad range in terms of history and legal development. International law has been accepted and poses a specific and distinguished position in Islam, as well as so that from the beginning of the establishment of Islamic State and even prior to advent of Islam, the tradition of asylum and protection of refugees has existed and have had a religious form. Asylum is called Amma or Ummah in Islamic jurisprudence, being universal and toward the humanity as a whole. The view of Islam regarding rights of refugees is not religious and exclusive, as alone entered into international treaties throughout the conclusion of the 1951 Convention relating the status of refugees under international law. Asylum is a sustainability of recommendation in nature and had no strong guarantee along the international mechanism. More or less, the rights and duties of refugees in Islam and international law are similar, and due to that fact, the Ummah is a contract. The Islamic State can subject to not being contrary to prudence and divine law, accept the order, conditions, the rights of refugees as provision. What distinguishes Islamic international law from customary and customary international law, paying attention to intellectual and ideological characteristics at the most important element in the formation of nationals. However, different countries and territories in the term of climate, geography, and race is the subject of divisions and designation. But in terms law and Islamic law, this division and other form because the intellectual and ideological character, the view of Islamic international law is more important because from the point of view of Sharia Islam, in the basis political, intellectual division, faith and disbelief, and so on. The reason in this jurists of different school and jurisprudence, lands and countries based on faith and unbelief, they have divided it, and because there is a kind of kinship between house and the land, they have named it Dar al-Islam and Dar al-Kufr and the like. According to the following, the findings of this study can be summarized as following. 1. The finding of this study can summarize as follows. 1. At the same time, citizenship from the point of view of Islam is a specific definition and its special division. Some of the customary law establishments in this regard are accepted by Islam. In other words, the customary rights of the entire population of a land are calculated from citizens' peaks and has no conditions, while from Islamic point of view, only the inhabitants of land and Islam, and has one of the two characteristics of covenants or faith is a citizens of Islamic State are considered and do not include other. Moreover, in Islamic political thought, the Islamic State or Islamic government is not limited to a specific country, and every Muslim live there, they are part of Islamic community. Second, citizenship in Islam is based on two pillars, or faith or covenants, and situation. With other divisions, customary is acceptable only this structure. 3. Entering into contractual citizenship of Islam in order to meet the possible conditions and accept citizenship phase. In addition, possibility is desirable. And the last 4, in some cases, withdrawal from the contractual citizenship of Islam is foreseen, but living citizenship, the face of Islam possible. In combination, Islamic law and customary law, 2 types of citizenship can be imagined: local citizenship and federal or cosmopolitan citizenship, where custom local citizenship of Sharia confirm federal as competition. That's finished. Very, very thanks for all of participation in this conference. Goodbye.
Thank you very much. Dr. Aziz.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Wasser, and thank you for Dr. Muhammad Khalil.
You're welcome. Thank you. So our third presenter, and please, I've always had,
it's okay.
to my shame, difficulty with Turkish names, but I'll try.
Okay.
Is it Ms. Gozde Ege?
Yes. Awesome.
Wonderful. Ms. Ege is in the interdisciplinary PhD program in Near and Middle East Studies. The Sable Brown Fellowship helped her research on the lives of the Palestinian refugee youth in Jordan, especially those in the camps set by the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees, UNRWA, in Amman, Jordan. Specifically, she wanted to focus on the lives and aspirations of Palestinian refugee youth who occupy both the humanitarian space of the camps within an increasingly neoliberal capital, Amman, whose growing inequalities further marginalize them. So please join me in welcoming Ms. Ege, and the floor is yours.
Thank you for this kind introduction, and thank you very much for organizing such a great conference. I'm honored to be a part of it, and it is very, very nice to see so many familiar and friendly faces too. They know themselves. So today I will share with you my presentation that draws upon some of the insights that came from my 2.5 years ethnographic research in one of the refugee camps in Jordan, Nasser camp located in East Amman. Please keep in mind that this is a work in progress. I welcome any kind of feedback, and seriously, I do. Okay, yalla. The atmosphere in Hayat Charity Association in Nasser Palestinian refugee camp drastically changed as May 2018, the month of Ramadan, approached. The phone started to ring as people called asking whether there are donations they could receive or whether they could donate iftar meals or boxes. On top of the daily activities in the association, volunteers increased their efforts to plan iftar events as days went by. 2 weeks before Ramadan, one volunteer from the management announced to us that they will stop the registration of new children until after Ramadan. This announcement did not generate a reaction from the others, which was surprising given the young volunteers' propensity to question any decision that was made without their input. After the meeting, I went to the house of Zainab, a university student who has been volunteering in Hayat, and inquired about why the association had decided to pause enrollment at this time. In her answer to my inquiries, Zainab highlighted a prominent tension between Hayat's development goals and how camp residents generally perceive the association's purpose. Our work is development, not charity, she said. Some people only send their children to Hayat during Ramadan only to receive aid. But we want children to come throughout the year to develop themselves. At the core of this tension was the precarity of the life in the camp. To the protracted refugees of the camp, under economic and political pressures, international aid from the main agency responsible for Palestinian refugees, UNRWA, had already diminished over the decades. Moreover, holding Jordanian citizenship didn't suffice for them to overcome their socioeconomic marginalization. In search for a relief to their economic situation, many Palestinian families I met throughout my fieldwork sought for charitable institutions in and around the camps. Thus, despite Hayat's insistence of defining its work as primarily developmental, many families expected Hayat, which in its name was a charitable association, to be a source of economic aid. In this presentation, I demonstrate how this generalized precarity of the camp life often creates tensions between volunteers' aspirations for development and families' expectations of economic aid, and how these tensions surface, especially during times of Islamic holidays. I argue that it is this generalized precarity, rather than a strong religious motivation, duty, or obligation, that pushes these young Palestinians to engage in economic aid provision through charitable giving, and despite their large reservations about it. Thus, my research does not comfortably align with the central observations of the risk scholarship at the intersection of faith and humanitarianism. For example, coming from Mona Atiyah, Sienna Craig, Amira Mittermeier, and Basit Iqbal. While the sensibilities around these youth activities do critique the common understandings of humanitarian reason as acts of compassion, they don't really indicate a strong sense of relationship with God, nor that of accumulating spiritual merit through volunteering. Overall, my interlocutors remained reluctant actors of charity, all the while remaining dependent on the temporalities of Islamic holidays. These occasions, especially Ramadan, by virtue of being heightened times of charitability, were significant to receive donations for the activities throughout the year. Zainab and her friends are all young people in their late teens and 20s. Most of them are inhabitants of the Nasser or other Palestinian refugee camps, and they used to be children in similar institutions with Palestinian camp volunteers. Thus, it should be noted that although one may initially think that their practices of care towards children in Nasser camp as disconnected to what takes place in other refugee camps, these practices are actually in conversation with intergenerational volunteer networks across the camps of Jordan. Moreover, these practices have a certain historicity. Zainab and many others situate these efforts within a repertoire that is locally known as Amel Fityani, boys' work, and they argue that this repertoire emerged in Jordan in the aftermath of the 1967 Arab-Israeli War. Part of my dissertation investigates the contentious memories on the emergence of this form of care, which is seen today either as being introduced by the PLO at the time or by a cooperation between YMCA and UNRWA. In mundane days of the year, volunteers' efforts centered around the creation of a certain kind of Palestinian refugee through their locally and intergenerationally negotiated understandings of development. Someone who knows their historical and cultural roots, as well as their rights as refugees, someone who is equipped to overcome their socioeconomic marginalization in Jordan, but who does so without severing their ties and disinvesting their energies from their camp community. To this end, they try to share with children whatever knowledge and social, cultural, and artistic skills they acquired from a previous generation of Palestinian volunteers, and lately from the INGO sector of Jordan, which got boosted with new refugee waves to Jordan. In engaging with children, they paid special attention to their problems at school, home, and in the street, and tried to come up with solutions to these problems. In this way, they hoped that children would find a safe space in and through the association and develop themselves in an atmosphere of joy and friendship. The programs, of course, emerged depending on the availability and commitment of young Palestinians who are often juggling sporadic jobs and education, and created a mixture of sensibilities, some of which demonstrated, one might say, a decolonizing vigor, while others reflecting some of the new tools that volunteers acquired through their familiarity with INGOs. Volunteers call their efforts humanitarian and developmental, but instead of responding to an emergency crisis of strangers, they try to address a generalized precarity of the refugee camp, which they saw as extending to the future, making the streets unsafe, the youth hopeless, and the camp inhabitants preoccupied with their survival. It's true that some of them amalgamated the practices they learned in the INGO sector to their programs, but their sense of legitimacy and expertise didn't come from their involvement in the sector, but their own experiences of this precarity while growing up in the refugee camps, and from their long years as camp volunteers. In fact, they were quite critical of foreign-funded humanitarian actors, and despite seeing some merits in their projects, many of them considered their ethics as being not really that humanitarian. For them, INGOs implemented short-term projects when funding was available. They depended on salaried labor and the knowledge of so-called experts who had no idea of the realities within which their recipients lived their lives. And their projects often aimed to inculcate individualist notions of development rather than a community spirit. In addition to their cynical view towards INGOs, many Hayat volunteers were also dissatisfied with economic aid provision that actors with charitable sensibilities generally engaged in. One of the reasons they left the youth club and opened their own association, Yusuf told me, was closely related to this dissatisfaction. They were upset that the new management provided them with a very limited space for development goals. They could use the place only once a week, and many of the older volunteers in the club were only petting the heads of the children, expressing pity because the child is an orphan or poor, feeding him a sandwich, and yallah, making them play football. Yusuf and his volunteer friends left the club, transformed Yusuf's family building into the space for the association, and according to them, established the first Amal Fityani association run by youth in the 13 Palestinian refugee camps of Jordan. Identifying as children of the camps themselves, volunteers didn't want children to be tied to Hayat through economic aid, and didn't want them to feel like they were objects of pity. To this end, they never addressed children as beneficiaries, but instead called them boys and flowers, and kept economic aid provision, which already remained quite limited, except during Ramadan and other Islamic holidays, discreet. In this picture, the Palestinian refugee child was not defined by its suffering, but he or she was a volunteer leader in the making. These children, by virtue of growing up as leaders of the future, were going to become the upcoming generations of camp volunteers. As a researcher, it's only at moments of crisis, and thanks to my friendship with some of my young interlocutors and families in the camp, I became aware of some of the economic aid provision Hayat provided to the families of some Palestinian as well as Syrian children. For the volunteers who envisioned the children as the leaders of tomorrow, overt forms of economic aid provision were undignifying and solidify a divide they wanted to overcome between themselves and children. In addition to this dissatisfaction, what was particularly interesting for me also was that how many of them showed quite a disdain towards the institutions that are known to be Islamic charities in Jordan. This disdain, however, again, didn't come from a critique of Islam or a professed secularity, but was largely from their own negative experiences in the institutions that are known to be Islamic charities, or with actors who prioritize faith in their humanitarian engagements. In fact, through the association, not only these young men and women celebrated Islamic holidays, but their care towards orphans were clearly grounded in Islamic sensibilities. However, in my interviews, it became apparent to me that some of them had lost their fathers at a very early age and became beneficiaries in Muslim Brotherhood institutions or in the youth clubs where Islamic actors gained the majority. Many remembered these institutions as spaces in which they were obliged to perform a certain kind of religiosity, something that made them feel undignified. It's only towards the end of my fieldwork when Yusuf complained to me about more of a current problem Hayat was experiencing, I understood that this disdain was not only connected to volunteers' individual pasts. Some families apparently told him that the Zakat committee annexing the camp told them not to send their children to Hayat because of its gender mixing and threatened them to cut them from their Zakat. While in theory, Yusuf and his friends could file an official complaint to the Ministry of Religious Affairs, they apparently chose not to do so, believing that the families would lose their zakat in the process, and this cost they wouldn't be able to manage to cover. Thus, I don't know whether this story is true, but despite being self-identified Muslims, they didn't want to be seen in the same light with institutions that prioritize faith. Finally, during the month of Ramadan, I better understood the extent to which even simple forms of economic aid created tensions among the children, families, volunteers, and prospective donors in this context of precarity and protracted refugeehood. The heightened activities of giving created different expectations for these stakeholders. Children wanted to go as many iftar events as possible. Families who were normally only in contact with the association to talk about their children sometimes kept inquiring about donation boxes. Volunteers created lists to make sure that each child goes to the same number of iftar events throughout the month, trying to squeeze last-minute invitations to the schedules they created. However, despite these precautions, towards the middle of the Ramadan, complaints and rumors started to circulate from disgruntled families who made Facebook posts or held private discussions in their houses about how their children did only go to one iftar event or only received one food box while others' children enjoyed multiple iftars. Regular programs in the association were paused, and volunteers invested all their energies in planning iftar outings and the central iftar they organize annually. This central iftar brings together families, children, and potential donors in a festive iftar atmosphere of fundraising. Before breaking their fast, children played many games volunteers prepared for them, and afterwards, they perform traditional Palestinian dances, recite poetry, sing songs, and display theater plays, demonstrating the many skills they acquired in the association. While for a viewer from outside, this event looks purely festive, for volunteers, actually, it was fraught with financial anxieties. This event was one of the largest sources of funding for Hayat, which otherwise ran through members' own monthly contributions and sporadic donations, and volunteers aimed to cover as many months of rent as possible through it.
2 minutes.
Yusuf,
Sorry.
Hmm?
2
2
minutes.
okay, almost. Yusuf was constantly on the phone to organize, and I noticed that his frustration was building up. I asked him, isn't this a good thing? People are interested to provide iftars. And in his mischievous manner, he told me the story of the nickname he received when he was a volunteer in the youth club. Apparently, the club used to accept any iftar invitation, regardless of what kind of meals it entailed or the activities before or after the breaking the fast. Yusuf was young and didn't have a decision-making power, but he would still carry salt and pepper in his pockets to give the donors the message that feeding people is not enough. And that's why they called him the father of salt, Abu Melech. He told me that in this Ramadan too, most donor interest focused on providing meals without any planned activities for children to engage. So Yusuf shared with me this story in 2018, but by the end of 2019, he came to me with what he perceived as a very tragic realization, that many families were having difficulties for putting food on their table. Moved and frustrated, he told me, they may need to accept any iftar offer for the upcoming Ramadan. Every year the situation gets worse, he said sadly. As you can guess, COVID-19 made life even more difficult, and actually Yusuf and many others got COVID because they were distributing aid. They tried to continue their programs through Zoom. To conclude, for these Palestinian refugee humanitarians who are at the margins of international aid, and whose work remains dependent on individual donations, voluntary work remains a contentious area where aspirations for the future and the realities on the ground can hardly be reconciled. However, I believe that these young refugees' efforts in reconciling these two daily should be seen as an invitation for a rethinking about our discussions around humanitarianism, development, and charity, which we sometimes tend to assume as standardized projects reflecting preconceived notions, either coming from the global north or directly from Islamic sensibilities. Prioritizing these notions may lead us to flatten the aspirations, desires, and negotiations ordinary young Muslims invest in their work and make their critiques against international humanitarianism or hegemonic Islamic approaches in their countries invisible. The case of Hayat volunteers, these aspirations and desires also come from youth life trajectories, meaning they attach to their collective history as Palestinian refugees and their relationship to their living spaces. Thank you. Sorry if I over.
Thank you very much. As you can see, I'm uncomfortable with my role as an interrupter, so my apologies.
No worries. Thank you.
So our final presenter is Dr. Singh. Dr. Singh is a professor at the Department of English at MSU, teaches and researches early modern literature and culture, including Shakespeare, travel writing, post-colonial theory, early modern histories of Islam, and race studies, often exploring the intersections of these different fields and periods. Her publications include The Post-Colonial World, co-edited, and Colonial Narratives, Cultural Dialogues, Discoveries of India in the Language of Colonialism. She is working on a monograph tentatively entitled Transcultural Islam. She has taught several courses and conducted workshops on early modern Islam and the West. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Singh.
Thank you. Let me pronounce my name for you, Jyotsna. I know it. I know people avoid it because it's hard. Well, let me thank everybody. I think this has been such an amazing conference. And I'd like to do a special shout out for Professor Muhammad Khalil, who is, the Muslim studies is one of my favorite places in MSU. And thanks to Mary Firdausi, who has sort of run this whole ship so well. And also to the three, planners and the visionaries, Najib, Farah, and Linda, for putting together this conference and the great papers that I heard. And, the papers that I heard were actually people, ethnographers, social scientists who worked on the ground and gave voice to the refugees and displaced people. And of course, this is such a kind of horribly prescient moment with, Ukraine being invaded. And so my interest is there are all these events happening. And as a sort of English professor, somebody interested in literature and culture, is what are the ideas and ideologies that inform policies and justifications like this awful war in Ukraine? And I actually poked around today on The Guardian and discovered that Putin believes in some theory called the biocosmic inner energy or passionate substance called Paschernost. It's by the son of a poet, Lev Gumilev. And so this is some kind of special dispensation that the Russians have, and he's basing this awful, the invasion on this. I'm very interested in two things. One is that I really believe that the culture in India, the richest part of Indian culture is it's syncretic. And Hinduism and Islam are the dominant, religions. I'm a Sikh, which is a kind of mediation. And there, there's rich Christian communities. And I think one of the really I think more people are realizing is that the worst damage being done by the Modi BJP government is not economic, political, as much as it is cultural and the way it's changing our national imaginary. And I think too many people, including many of us in the diaspora, don't kind of recognize it. So I just want to begin that in terms of the far-reaching changes, economic, political, social, and cultural in the India governed by the BJP, the Modi government, questions of citizenship and nationalism shape many debates. Who is an Indian today? Who defines the nation? What is our national culture? Who is claiming the nation? Where and how is this culture being constructed? Who can claim a pure historical lineage from the ancient pre-Islamic Aryan period? Or can the descendants of Muslims, whose lineage partly comes from the medieval visitors, conquerors, also be counted as Indians? More importantly, the larger question that I think gets repressed, though it's very active in India still, I mean, there's some rich debates, is India a hybrid syncretic society, and can we expect that Hinduism, Islam, and other religions in India, Buddhism has such a great legacy in India, Sikhism, which came out in the 16th, 17th century, Christianity, Jainism, and these religions developed through a long history of encounters and interactions and produced this syncretic culture. Today, particularly, I've worked a lot on Islam and the influence, and I'm interested in Mughal India, which I'll talk about. I just want to focus on the place of Muslims in Modi's India. And they are horrible stories. If you look up open newspapers, there's a blatantly open and verifiable record of assaults and attacks on Muslim religious sites, in halal meat shops, on interfaith marriages between Hindus and Muslims, which is an awful term that these fundamentalists have coined called love jihad, and they are really threatening people's lives in interfaith marriages and intimidation. And I will kind of go back and forth a little bit on screen sharing and a PowerPoint. And forgive me for being a little truncated here. I just wanted to show a few things on PowerPoint and not. Okay, so let's see. So this is a very great organization, actually run by somebody who I used to know, who he was a government official who resigned, and it's called Caravan-e-Mohabbat, the caravan of love. And they are keeping a record. They are like the history keepers of the attacks and the threats and intimidation of Muslims, and they also help. So it has resolved that its journey must continue, not metaphorically, but also literally. It must continue its journey in solidarity of victims of hate crimes, at least once a month. And I should maybe go to the slideshow, sorry. It'll just take me a minute. And it must help build safety nets for the victims and its families. And it must, it has a lot of institutions like Insaniyat committees and state-level human rights coalitions. And this is a group you can see, they have literally put together a caravan, which is called Caravan-e-Mohabbat, and they are documenting hate crimes all over the country. And they are doing an amazing, amazing task. So that is, one of the important aspects of this. So my focus is, I begin by drawing on Louis Althusser's essay, Ideology and Ideological State Apparatuses. I want to explore the ways in which India's citizens are recognized or hailed or interpellated as full citizens or not of the Indian nation. And how do the various modes of educational and cultural production produce nationalist discourses which erase and literally cut off Muslim history, language, and culture from the nationalist imaginary? I'm going to examine quickly 4 sources of this cultural erasure and historical erasure. First is the RSS, which is the fascist sort of ground body of the BJP. It was an organization that had been banned in India, and it's called the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, which is the National Volunteer Organization. The word Sangh is also kind of like a community. And it's extreme right-wing proto-fascist organization that mobilizes Hindus under a racist ideology of pure Hindu nation, or what they call Hindutva, of a Hindu-ness as an ideological formation that focuses on this completely historically inaccurate idea that in the Aryan period, the only legitimate inhabitants of India were Hindus, and they were not, they're kind of denying the migration theory, which is really the centerpiece of Indian history. And so in this kind of blatant xenophobic Hindu nationalism, Muslims are erased from this historical narrative. And there, I can answer some questions. Now, recently, they're also attacking Christians. Obviously, once they start this xenophobia, it extends to others. The other thing they're doing is they are basically erasing the period of the Mughals. The Mughal India it started in the kind of early 16th century, and it has left this amazing legacy of rich syncretic cultural production, all the architecture that the Taj Mahal, but in addition, the work in paintings, in manuscripts, and in an extremely tolerant and interfaith societies, very cosmopolitan. And I'll talk a little bit about that at the end. They're also opposing, which is very central to sort of the generation of my parents, is the Nehruvian idea of a pluralistic secular India, which affords full citizenship to all religions, creeds, and cultures. And this is enshrined in the Indian Constitution. The BJP, in contrast, is producing an ethno-nationalist state. All these cultural formations, fortunately, as yet have not completely stifled the country, and there are many opposing voices, but I think there's a huge threat constantly. And I think I would also like to briefly touch back that there is a pushback by historians to make visible this ideological agenda of Hindutva, and as it has permeated cultural histories and narratives. So the important scholars, and I'll just show them, Romila Thapar, Audrey Trushke, Shashi Tharoor, these are just a few, have made important interventions in presenting accurate accounts of ancient India, Mughal India, and the Nehruvian ideas of secularism and the cornerstone of independent India. So what exactly is this RSS, or Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh? It's a national volunteer organization. And a key early thinker of this organization was a man called V.D. Savarkar, who spoke of India as the fatherland and shared very much with Nazi Germany and the Nazis a concern of purity of bloodlines. Savarkar and others found Hitler's treatment of the Jews a useful model of how to deal with India's Muslim minority. For instance, there was M.S. Golwalkar, second leader of the RSS, who wrote that Germany's purging the country of its Semitic race is a good lesson for us in Hindustan to learn and profit by. It chills one's blood today to read such vitriol, especially given that men, among other vices, Hindutva is deeply invested in male domination and patriarchy. And these are the very men, and these are the teachings that are governing India today. And I know that this is a sort of, there's a denial in many circles in Delhi and the big, cosmopolitan cities. But if you really look and see how these teachings are permeating, and I'm just going to go back and show you an image of these, let's see, the Sangh. So this is it. This is their mission statement. So, if people who don't believe in the RSS just go on their webpage, they don't even hide it anymore. It's just there. The Hindu culture is the life breath of Hindustan. It is clear it is to be protected. We should first nourish the Hindu culture. And if the Hindu culture in Hindustan, if the Hindu society ceases to exist, it will hardly be noticed. The entire society should be in such a vigilant kind of an organized condition that no one should dare to cast an evil eye on any of our points of honor. Strength, it should be remembered, comes only through organization. It is therefore the duty of every Hindu to best to consolidate the Hindu society. And the Sangh, that's the sort of community. And they call it Sangh Parivar, which is the family of this organization. Lakhs of young men should dedicate their entire lifetime for this cause. And unless you do that, you cannot really change anything. So this is the kind of, and this is what they look like. This is like, it's just like something from Mussolini's brown shirts, or they get up early morning, and these are called shakhas, where they, and what is a shakha? A saffron flag flutters in the midst of an open playground. Youths and boys of all ages engage in varieties of indigenous games. Uninhibited joys fill the air, their exercises, Surya Namaskar, and they wield the danda, the stick. All activities are totally disciplined. The physical fitness programs are followed by a group singing of patriotic songs. And the day's activity culminates in the participants assembling in orderly rows in front of the flag at a single whistle of the group leader. And then they say, "My salutation to you, loving motherland, Matru Bhumi." The prayer verses, even as the group leaders' various commands, are all in Sanskrit. So this is you can get an idea of, what they believe in and how they are. And these shakhas are very common. They're happening all the time. And if you're in India, you can, an early morning, you'll be able to find them. So the next point is the revision of the original history of ancient India. Is how, and any citizens of countries often imagine themselves through myths of origin. This is what we know the Nazis did and so forth, through shared histories and genealogies. Until the BJP agenda, history in Indian education was fairly unbiased. And I recall history, it was boring, but there were a lot of facts. And they were harnessed to some sort of neoliberal teleology of progress, but you basically had factual, boring accounts, Indus Valley civilization, Aryan migrations, Mughal India, British colonization, post-colonial Congress rule, and it was very factual. And you did have an ideological agenda of Gandhi and Nehru and promoting the freedom movement. Currently, it's in the BJP society, and this is happening in people in education, that Hindu superiority is the only pure Indian race, and the BJP fuel nationalists claim that the Indus Valley civilization, an ancient civilization in the northwest subcontinent that declined a few years ago before the Aryans arrived, was continuous with the Vedic culture and Sanskrit language of the Aryans, who came from Central Asia, called themselves Aryans and revered the Vedas, the oldest Sanskrit texts. Followers of Hindutva have gone to lengths of dishonesty, fabricating evidence entirely such as a horse seal to attempt to show that the Indus Valley civilization and Vedic culture are all the same. Hindutva ideologues want Hindus alone to be indigenous to India so that this one social group can define what it means to be Indian and it can exclude others from this category, perhaps above all Muslim. In Hindutva history, pre-modern India had two phases: a glorious Hindu golden age, followed by Muslim oppression of Hindus, and later followed by a British colonialism. Now, India has this absolutely amazing historian. She's like, I don't know, she must be in her late 90s, Ramila Thapar. And people may have heard of her. And I just want to, this is who she is. She lives in Delhi, and they have tried to attack her and imprison her and threaten her. But I think she's so famous that there's no way that they, oh, it's time? Is it time? Okay, all right. Moving ahead. So she has said, British conquered India but did not settle in the land. They drained its resources. Unlike the British, the Turks, Afghans, Arabs, and Mughals, the Muslim rulers, but they settled in the country and created new communities. So she has challenged the purported singularity of this Indian heritage and a timeline of the Hindu golden age, followed by the Muslim period of decline. She's challenged that Aryans were migrants not rooted in some pure Indian soil. And true to her academic rigor, she has refused to perpetuate pious myths or distorted colonial interpretations of the past. So I think she has now mentored a generation of younger scholars. So finally, I just want to talk about my most favorite part is the Mughal India. And one of the worst things that the BJP has done is they are removing all Urdu and Persian from Indian languages. So I'm finding, I go to India and I listen to the TV and I can't understand this heavily Sanskritized Hindi they're speaking. So I'll finally just show you a few slides about Mughal India that they are repressing. And 1 minute. So the Mughals were 16th and 17th century. They were social activists, politicians, and other public figures, always extol the harmony in which religious communities existed during Mughal rule. They played host to a diverse range of individuals, including Brahmin Pandits, Jains, Jesuit priests, Hindus and Muslims. Artists worked together in Mughal ateliers, and the paintings of the Mughal court, the great Mughal paintings, were often done by Hindu artists. They employed large numbers of Hindus at various levels, and they actually form a part of the national mythology of secularism. And finally, these are just, scenes of the Mughal. This is a great Mughal court, where the Sufis. And finally, I just wanted to show one of the big aspects of Indian Islam is the Sufi shrines. So the Islam that came to India from Baghdad were these 5 or 6 Sufi peers. And this is the one in Delhi that celebrates all the Hindu festivals. So they have Muslim festivals, and they have a mosque there, and it's called Nizamuddin Chishti. And then these are my holiday pictures of all the Mughal, pre-modern Mughal sites in Delhi. And this is a mosque that Timur had built in India, in the 1400s. So what I'm just trying to share today is that people think that this cultural assault is just minor and they should look at economics. But I think if you really look what the damage they're doing is, and so if you're a young Muslim or you're an older Muslim, they are denying you your cultural citizenship, your cultural identity, and because they are denying your history through these ideologies. So I'll just end with that. Thank you so much.
Many, many thanks. So I have a quick hopefully less than 5 minutes, general comments. When I comment on each of this paper, at the end, there's a quick question. The panelists are welcome to answer, but I'd probably best to open first to the public before we, so address those. I'm sure people have better question. And please, I base my comments mostly on the papers, and some of these papers have addressed some of my questions. So anyway, so let me start again by thanking all the participants for their interesting and thought-provoking papers. The subject matter of this panel is very close to my heart. As a Palestinian, now an American citizen, I spent most of my youth as a stateless refugee in different Arab countries before migrating to Canada and then moving to the United States for graduate studies. Therefore, modern statelessness and what it does to the psyche and material well-being of individuals and communities is not a theoretical concept for me, my family, and for the vast majority of my Palestinian community. It is from this perspective that I approach these papers, and it is what informs my questions. The papers presented can be divided into two main categories. The first focusing on statelessness from the perspective of the refugees or stateless individuals themselves in Jordan and Canada in this case. The other with statelessness, as I would like to call it, an institutional problem. This part is a little complicated because one paper deals with the legal framework for dealing with or welcoming stateless refugees, as in the case of Iran. And the other explores how political institutions create conditions for the production of statelessness in the case of India. Ms. Ej's paper focuses on one charity organization, Hayat, at a Palestinian refugee camp in Jordan. It highlights and attempts to explain a kind of tension that exists between the administrators in this charity, the volunteers essential for its working, and the general public in the camp. With respect to the understanding of the mission of the charity, is it about providing immediate relief for present needs as the public expects, or should it emphasize human development as especially the young volunteers' hope? This tension is seen not as the product of religious or ideological differences, but as a natural outcome of the general and persistent economic hardships within the refugee camps. The focus of the paper is mostly on the young volunteers. I would like to hear more about what motivates these young people. What is the basis for their apparent optimism that they can change the material conditions of their fellow refugees, and how realistic, in your estimation, are these hopes? Dr. Iqbal's paper compares the lives of two relatively recent refugees, a Syrian in Jordan and an Iraqi in Canada. The former is a refugee escaping the Syrian civil war, and the latter is a recent naturalized citizen in Edmonton, Canada. It used to be my home town, by the way. As someone who studies Ibn Khaldun, I found the portion of the paper that deals with him intriguing, especially because I never thought of linking Ibn Khaldun's analysis of medieval society to my experience with modern statelessness. But for the sake of time, I would like to learn more about the shared experience, which actually Dr. Iqbal began to give us something of it, of estrangement between the two individuals that the paper focuses on. I'm interested in the sense of alienation that both individuals experience as a result of being cut off from their homeland. Am I right in a sense that of these two individuals, the former Iraqi refugee, now a Canadian citizen, feels much more in terms of estrangement, of Ghurba, than the Syrian refugee in Jordan? One has the protection of the law, and the other is kind of like, I know that, precarious existence when the law is not, when you're basically nothing as a stateless person, or seen as so. And if so, what explain these differences? Dr. Singh's papers explores how Hindu nationalism attempts to change the culture of India. The evidence presented for such efforts is quite disturbing. To see attempts to turn a truly diverse cosmopolitan culture with its infinitely rich and complicated history into a nationalistic nightmare. Having presented such evidence, I'm interested to learn a little bit, and I think in the presentation, you provided hint to that, about how Muslim Indians push back against, and also other Hindus actually, and Sikh and other Indians push back against these efforts to make them, especially the Muslims, stateless, if not legally, at least spiritually. How optimistic are you about efforts to resist, to subvert such attempts, to kind of like whitewash or saffron wash India's history? Last but certainly not least, Dr. Ghazizadeh's paper explores the jurisprudential and legal status of non-Shia Muslim refugees. It provides an interesting comparison between the notion of Islamic citizens and modern understanding of citizens and international law. All of this is, of course, legal and theoretical. I would like to hear more from Dr. Ghazizadeh, how this framework actually operates in the modern Islamic Republic of Iran, especially with respect to recent refugees from Afghanistan. And I'm also interested in maybe non-Shia, since that's the focus of the paper. Like how is the legal framework is there, but how in practice the treatment exists there. Well, thank you. And I think maybe we should just open it first for people's questions and answers.
Thank you. Those are very good points. Thank you.
Thank you. So
I think there's a question here for me.
Okay. Perez. So we'll have Dr. Perez and I'm sorry, Asil Sawalha. So Michael, sorry.
Thank you. Thank you all for the panel papers. I want to ask a question, very general and open for both Dr. Iqbal and soon to be Dr. Ege. You're both, I found both of your papers very compelling, precisely because I'm interested in some of the things you're working with. But both of you are dealing very much with what is this discursive line between the secular and the religious, the theological and the secular. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that process, because I found, for example, taking Ghurba, which you could correct me if it has any theological significance, but the idea of an estrangement that could be theologically grounded in some ways as making sense of realities that are potentially exceed, just like sometimes the secular attempts to capture something that's not secular. I don't know. Maybe the line is blurry and you can talk about that, but that's something I'm just curious about, that because I found it very useful how you approached it. And then for Ms. Ege, I was thinking about the ways that maybe the aspirational sits in relation to a secular or a religion. And again, you can challenge my use of the dichotomy if you wish, but if at all, because I've seen that your interlocutors are very compelling precisely in the ways that they seem to be not firmly placed anywhere there. I don't know, I find them operating in a kind of distinctive space of aspiration and activity. So anyways, I just wanted to pitch that and see what the two of you might offer.
I will go first because I'm sure Basit's answer will be much better. So, okay, so this thing about secular and religious, I mean, this is one of the things that I'm struggling with in trying to understand what has been taking place. Partially, I think maybe one of the reasons that it becomes such a struggle for us to think about this is maybe we are really inspired and influenced by this religious individual cultivation narratives like Sabah Mahmud's. And I guess no matter what, when we go to places, we are probably looking to see that. But then when we don't see that, when we see a place where there is a lot of just like youthfulness, play, shouting, screaming, some sort of discipline, some sort of like ideas about like liberation of people is more important than liberation of land, these kinds of discourses, I think maybe we get dumbfounded. In my case, I do. So maybe I would like to challenge you on that dichotomy, because I don't know, I'm from Turkey, and it's this like not this self-aware Muslimness, a kind of like Muslimness that is not occupying your mind unless maybe you meet a Christian or an atheist. That kind of Muslimness that is very ordinary, slippery, And I don't think that is secular necessarily. It's just one of the ways, I would say. And I know I couldn't answer your question well, but I am also trying to understand. Maybe it's more like, I think it was Shilke's book about the young Egyptians. Maybe that kind of Muslimness is going on here. Also, I think what happens is that in the process of establishing rapport, it's always like give and take. And I think I approach the people, they see me, I see them, they see. Then like you kind of start to open up. And maybe we have some similarities in terms of the slipperiness. That's why maybe these, I mean, I think if somebody else did this research, they would have seen something else, because everybody reveals a certain part of their subjectivity in relation to the researcher too. So yeah, that's it.
And, you know, like, unfortunately, we have to finish around 3 o'clock. So just, you know, we need to bear that in mind. I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, I'll be quick then as well. Thank you for the question. I think for a long time, I think studies I think humanitarianism itself has long been narrated as the discovery of a secular value for life, one that, you know, and explicitly so, and the secular value for life, you know, the one that's grounded in humanity and not in some kind of a theological basis. But you know, as obviously, you know, more recent literature has complicated that relationship between religion and humanitarianism, and has tried to, I guess, complicate this the way that projects of religious charity, you know, occupy an ambivalent and complex ground within the broader space of, I guess, the humanitarian field writ large. I'm realizing that that's getting away from your original question. I think in this particular case, I can say, well, the two people that I'm focusing on, they do think about Ghurba itself as having this kind of theological infrastructure. That's not to say that modern displacement itself would necessarily have that, but I guess I find something compelling about the way that they're able to frame this you know, deep sense of estrangement and alienation in those terms. And I guess I'm drawn to it also because of what I said at the beginning of the paper, that, you know, often religion is framed in these accounts simply as a cultural resource, you know, that can be, you know, drawn on to deal with the difficulties of one's life. But that's often how it's left, you know, and it's kind of given this generic quality of, you know, of offering some kind of a solace. But I'm also drawn to how it doesn't necessarily offer solace. It gives a different language for thinking about ambivalence, ambiguity, difficulty. But that's no guarantee against the difficulty of that estrangement. It gives a different idiom for thinking about it. And so this paper maybe is a turn toward, you know, thinking about what you called in your paper kind of the darker side of creativity, and the kind of the creative side of exclusion, in this case in a theological language. But that's not necessarily that's not to say that it's some kind of a narcotic, you know, against the pain of that experience as well. But thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I have a written question, and then I will go to Dr. Swalha and Dr. Miller. Dr. Sulaiman asked the question for Dr. Singh: how does the SSR define Hindustan? Where are its boundaries? Thanks.
Okay, so this is the RSS. I think that other than their very distorted history and science, I think their sense of geography also is problematic. They do acknowledge Pakistan. I think now they do acknowledge, though they feel that it was all one India. But I think the main thing is the Muslim citizens, they believe they all belong in Pakistan and not in India. And this links up to your question that you had put earlier. There is a lot of young Muslim intellectuals, journalists, professors. There is a lot of counter narratives and very rich and gives me a lot of hope. There's a very rich movement of counter narratives in Kashmir, for instance. There's some amazing poets and writers. So the RSS it's this kind of xenophobic nationalism where they want to literally purify India. And you know what? 2 years ago, I remember telling people that now, first they're coming after Muslims, and now this year they had attacks on many, many Christian churches. All over Christmas, they were attacking churches. So, you know, I'm a Sikh, which is, again, a different community. And Sikhs are thinking, well, they will come after us now. So I think the answer to Camilia's question, thank you, is that they want to literally purify the nation in terms of the actual population.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Singh. So unfortunately, we're just at about 3 o'clock, and actually Professor Waseem El-Rayes had to leave. He actually has to leave at 3. And in any case, on the schedule, we have to move on to the next item. So I do apologize. I know we had a couple of others who had questions, but we are up against the time, unfortunately. So actually, now we will proceed to the closing. And of course, if there are remaining questions, maybe that will come up eventually as well. First of all, I want to take this opportunity to thank all of our incredible presenters, the incredible discussants, and the organizers, and everybody who participated in this conference. We really appreciate your involvement. This was a very stimulating, interesting conference. And I think now is a time to reflect and to think about next steps. I'd like to, at this time, to turn to the 3 individuals who proposed this conference, who were the lead organizers. They are, again, Dr. Farha Abbasi, Professor Najib Hourani, and Professor Linda Sayed. And maybe we can follow that order. So I'll begin with Dr. Farha Abbasi. If you may, Dr. Abbasi, offer some closing thoughts, and then we'll go from there. Thank you. Okay, maybe we will, maybe Dr. Abbasi is not quite ready. So why don't we go to Professor Linda Sayed.
Hello, everyone. First of all, I just simply wanted to say thank you for such fascinating, I think, research that approached the issue of, I think, statelessness, displacement, refugee studies in such a kind of not only complex, but multifaceted way. Not only did we see in our research today that our presenters exposed kind of the complexities involved in producing spaces of statelessness in terms of political, social, cultural constraints that produce such spaces. But I also think that our presenters also provided spaces in which we can think of advocacy. We can think of ways to speak about refugees or stateless persons that also are aware of kind of our positionality and the various kind of power dynamics that are involved in producing research on individuals who are not in many ways involved in producing knowledge in these spaces. So I thank you all for also making us think critically about how we advance research on stateless persons and refugees, and how we can kind of move forward in terms of producing much more, I would say, fruitful, complex, and hopefully kind of, I would say, motivating kind of research in the future. So my hope is that we can kind of use this space to think of ways to publish, but also ways of kind of also providing avenues of advocacy, mobilization, change, the ways in which we can think of our role as researchers. And I think most of us also work on the ground with stateless individuals and refugees. So how can we also use those sorts of exchanges to further kind of mobilize these efforts? So as I said, I'm really grateful for all of your participation, for allowing us, I would say, insight into your research. And I know how difficult that is for researchers to expose research that's also even in the beginning phases or in progress. So I thank you for allowing us kind of some insight into that world of your studies and field. So thank you again.
Thank you so much, Professor Sayed. And I know actually Professor Najib Hourani is under the weather. Professor Hourani, are you able to speak?
Oh, I'm more or less here. I don't know if you can see me. Am I hooked up?
Let's see here. Yes, I will put the spotlight on you right now.
No, don't put spotlight.
Don't
okay.
do it.
That's fine. I don't care. Hi. I want to begin by echoing what Linda had to say. I think it's been a really good couple of days, and I'm really quite excited about seeing where this goes from here. There are a number of really super papers, and I just really want to thank everybody for the hard work that they put into their presentations and their thoughtful work for this event. One of the things that I really came to think about as we were listening to the conversations, especially from the earliest panel, the first panel, which was mostly about law, and how, you know, we still tend to think about law, international law, as being something that's only for the powerful, right? It's sort of like a university, right? Laws don't exist unless the powerful want to enforce them. But that also, I think, hides from view sort of this area of play. And this was something that came up when I was talking with Gozde, actually, about her own work a little bit ago. And she was talking about how the conceptions of religion and religious charity don't pre-exist the debates about and acts of charity, right? So similarly, when we think about international law, we could think about how it moves back and forth. It's not a static thing, but it's something that moves with economic, you know, relations in the global political economy, with race relations in, you know, the racism of colonization and imperialism and so forth. All of these things push in one direction, but they're also ways of pushing in another direction, right? So it's not a static thing that affects affects cases uniformly, but there's always a back and forth. And so that's something that I was thinking about, how we might start to think about law and humanitarianism in that kind of a frame, as something mobile rather than fixed and outside, framing how we think of populations and people. So that's really the one of the things that I've been thinking about, and I really do appreciate the chance to think about it with all of you. We want to talk about publication as well. So, but I think Dr. Farha is with us. So we'll first let Dr. Farha have her say here. And this was, of course, what her idea. And so we'd like to hear her thoughts and reflections.
I just would add one thing that really stands out to me was the role ideology plays in these regimes and politics, and how I right now, when we look into the literature around biases, racism, we realize one thing which is called disconsciousness. Disconsciousness is not exactly unconscious or conscious. It's like how we are distorting our consciousness and how we all believe what the truth is, what is our truth, right? But there are truths and then there are truths, right? We realize that with COVID-19 and around the vaccination, but we are also seeing around a lot of the major world issues, this disconsciousness is how it's impacting the policies. So I just wanted to bring that into focus as well, is that we have to be aware of how this disconsciousness is playing into, because I think all of us feel like we start with very good intentions, and a lot of these policies around refugees or laws, international laws, they start with good intentions, right? But it is like, who are you focusing on? So I read somewhere, we ensure results by investing in things, but we have also ensured results by not investing in certain things. So that is something my takeaway from the conference was, how do we challenge this consciousness, and how do we kind of continue to seek what is true from the lens of social justice?
Thank you so much, Dr. Abbasi. Now, I know, Professor Harani, you wanted to discuss publication, so why don't I give it over to you to talk about that?
Hi, yes, I think, every time we do a conference like this, we want to make sure that we can create opportunities for the people who present and the people that worked on it to derive some benefit out of it. And especially in terms of publication, obviously. So the way that I think about it, and I don't necessarily have a place to publish in mind, but the way that I think about it is that perhaps the younger scholars would benefit from some kind of a special issue or portion of a special section of a special issue of a journal, so that they can put down on their CV, a peer-reviewed journal article, which appeals to bean counters everywhere, apparently. And then for those who don't necessarily need such things, we could think about either a less disciplinary or prestigious journal, or an edited volume. An edited volume, of course, takes a while. So that's why I think about it for those scholars who might not necessarily need to have something on their CV. So that's really the way that I think about publishing these kinds of things. But then I think too the group as a whole should discuss the wheres and hows. Where do you want to publish things, and timelines and the like. Pardon me, I'm going to stop talking now.
You're fine. Thank you, Professor Harani. And I should mention also that I know Dr. Habesi was discussing the possibility of offering the Journal of Muslim Mental Health for a special issue. So that's also a possibility.
That would be a great place.
Yeah. I don't know if others would like to add anything, Professor Linda Sayed or Dr. Habesi.
No, I'm good. I want to hear what the rest of the group feels.
Yeah, I think I also would like to hear what the rest of the group feels, and what approach they like to take, especially for junior faculty members. I'm a junior. I'm still an assistant, early on assistant professor, and I wonder what works best. I mean, I think for the rest of you in terms of how we would like to proceed. So I think I would like to hear their concerns as well, since we do have quite a few junior faculty members who presented in this conference. And I see a couple of hands up. So I saw Salah, Jyotsna, Asil. So I don't know if they also want to contribute.
Yeah, I know Professor Asil Solha had hand up for a while, so I think I'll turn it over to Asil. Yeah.
Sorry, that was from the earlier one.
Oh, that's fine. That's fine. No worries. In that case, the next hand I see is Professor Jyotsna Singh.
Hi, I'm as a senior scholar, I would like to share with you is I co-edit a series called Transculturalisms, which has done really well with Palgrave history. Unfortunately, we kind of end at 1800. But I don't need a piece, but I'm happy to do some mentoring here if you need, and sometimes I find that journal articles take longer. They take a long time. People just sit on as readers. So that's something, I think if you go for a special issue, check with them beforehand, before for junior. I know I've had graduate students and the articles just sit somewhere. So that's just a thought, but I would be happy to, once you decide to, in any way, if I can help you, we've done this series for several years. And so I'm just offering my services here.
Do you have an in with somebody at Palgrave that might help us beyond that series?
I'm happy to look at, because there's one that my series, and there's another series where I actually recently had helped somebody publish a book. I've helped quite a few junior scholars, so I can certainly connect, except, my field is all earlier, like pre-1800 or up to 1900 also. So I'm happy to talk about it. We can certainly look. I mean, I know two people in Palgrave, and one is our series and one is another one. To do that. So, feel free to pick on me in whatever way.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. I also see Gozde's hands up.
Yeah, thank you for willing to be a mentor for us, first of all. And second, I think of course, like really appreciate Dr. Harani's thoughts about us as junior scholars. I'm a very junior scholar, and I'm afraid I'm going to remain as well. But that's another story. But really, if there would be a peer-reviewed process, I think I'm being realistic. For my case, I would really, really want to contribute because I haven't published anything, and I mean, it would be great to do it together with you guys, first of all. And second, I think, yeah, apparently these things are very important in academia. So it would be really great to do it in conversation with you all.
Thank you so much. I see Professor Perez has his hand up.
Yeah, I just want to say I think it's a great idea, Najib, and I think that I'd be willing anyways if anyone was interested in working on a special issue that took just statelessness as the topic. I think that there are various journals that I know that in the last conference I participated in, we ended up with a peer review special issue, and it took about a year and a half-ish, and that's with COVID. Maybe a little less, but you know, that's the slow grind of the machinery of this stuff. So I would be anyways willing to participate in some conceptualizing some sort of issue about statelessness or that encompasses as many people want to participate.
Thank you so much, Dr. Perez. I think Marwa may have had her hand up, but I could be mistaken.
No, never mind.
Oh no, that's okay. Please feel free.
No, I agree with everybody else. I was mainly thinking about, I know we received feedback during our individual or like allocated panels, but if we were to go forward, would it be each of our papers compiled, and would we get more, even more specific feedback? Like, yeah. For example, I'd want to refine mine because it's from a couple years ago, and that was mainly my question, like those little details. But I don't know if we're there to. That's why I put my hand down.
Oh no, I think that's a great question, and I think speaking on behalf of the group, I would imagine yes. I think they would. I mean, my understanding is that the three organizers would be very much interested in being involved in this and offering feedback and so on. I hope, if I'm mistaken, please correct me, but
yeah, no, I think that's right. You know, we would probably want to read the papers in their a complete form, perhaps based upon some of the feedback that you got from this, and then we would go through them all, I think, much more carefully, depending on which direction we go. Of course, if you go for a journal article, there would be probably an outside peer review as well. But an edited volume, generally not, but then again, edited volume chapters don't count, quote unquote, as much as a peer-reviewed article, especially for social sciences anyway. So yeah, but we would want to make sure that they're polished enough when they go under review that the chances of them getting hung up or God forbid rejected would be as minimal as possible. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, and Michael, I had a question for you. Do you have any thoughts as to where you would see an issue on statelessness?
Well, I mean, I was always taught to aim as high as you can. Unfortunately, there are hierarchies of journals. So I would think that, there's the Journal of Refugee Studies. I think that's a prime place to do it. There are also several that have to do with migration. There's Refugee Survey Quarterly. But there's also, I was just looking this up as well, and there was a journal I had forgotten about, but I think it has to do with Middle East and North Africa. So it does sort of exclude people if their focus is not on that region. But yeah, it's called Mashriq and Mahjar.
Yeah.
So I would be, thinking we could definitely consider. I'll tell you this, I don't see a lot in the Journal of Refugee Studies about statelessness. I've looked, obviously, because I have to do work on this, and I will say doing statelessness searches in their journal, there there's not a consistent discussion about it. So I think we would have that advantage that we could actually really highlight something about statelessness in that journal.
Okay. Are you guys familiar with international migration as a journal? How's that? I know Rochelle is published there. Do you guys have any thoughts on that journal? Sorry if my voice sounds weird. I have a sore throat and I've become a Ricola junkie today.
Your voice sounds fine. It seems
Okay.
there are no thoughts on the journal though. Oh,
Yeah, I think that's a good one. And I know of another journal, but now I can't remember the name. I know someone who is on the board of Insaniyat, which is the Association for Palestinian Anthropologists. He's on the board and he's like, he wants to publish things related to that. So I can get you in touch with that as well. So I'll get the email now and get you the name of it's an anthropology journal. I think American Anthropologist. So he was saying, if you want a special issue or something like that, he will help in that.
Oh, okay.
So I can just look up that. And also if you want an edited volume in a book, I'm on the board of Fordham University Press. We can do that, a quick volume in a book, an edited volume in a book.
Wow, okay.
So that would be an easy one, like that would be the fastest one. But it's they send it to 2 reviewers, but it's easier than it doesn't have the value of a peer-reviewed article, but it's an edited volume published by a university press.
Okay.
And I can push them to send it out quick to.
Oh, that would be amazing. Okay. We should have done that for the Arab Cities Conference.
I was not on the board yet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Are there other thoughts?
I was just going to suggest we could also, to broaden it, the Journal of Ethnic and Migration Studies, which might give a bit more space for people to include their work, since we do have a diverse range of articles. And then, Asil, were you thinking about Anthropological Quarterly, AQ? Because I know they're also, we could maybe potentially do a journal article series in them. If that's the one you were thinking about.
oh, I see. I think you're muted, Asil.
Because I was on my email trying to find. Yes, I think so. I'm trying to find the name. Yeah. I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Of course,
Yeah.
one thing that will help is to get a sense of who's willing to submit a paper for the publication. And I think maybe right after this, we could send an email and see who's willing to be involved in this project. And I think that will give us a better sense of what we're working with. But sorry, Najib, you were going to say something.
No, well, I mean, I think just, it's always worthwhile to have some sort of contact with the editorial board or the editor. It doesn't always help, but it can, it's better to, I think, to have somebody generally that we can link up to and have sort of an in. We need a wasta, as they say, right?
Yeah.
So are there any other locations that people would be interested in? I mean, some of the papers were very oriented around law. Would they, I think there were very different kinds of papers. There were some on humanitarianism, some on law in particular. Then the health, mental health papers. We could think about mixing them up, or we could think about sending them to different locations based upon their topics. So that's something else to think about. Again, I don't want to complicate things too much, but then again, I also don't want to be overwriting people's needs and wishes. So I just wanted to throw that out there as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think one of the things too, when you see the papers that are available, we may decide that, hey, we may actually have 2 or 3 special issues here. One for the Journal of Muslim Mental Health, one for a journal on refugee studies, maybe another one for the Journal of Islamic and Muslim Studies. I'm actually on the board on that one. And I'm sure they'd be eager to publish that as well. So there may be more than one special issue. And of course, there may be an edited volume instead. So these are all things we'll have to, I guess, we'll have to assess when we see the papers that are there.
Yeah, okay. And I know Salah has had a lot of experience. I don't know if Salah's with us. Does he have any advice? Salahito?
I know Salah
may not be with us. All right.
It may not be available, but I do see him here. Yeah.
Okay. And then we can decide, you know, I think the organizers would naturally be at least one of the editors for each. And then we'd probably have a co-editing situation is what I was imagining, but I don't want to impose. But I'll totally take Michael up on the offer to help edit.
Absolutely.
He's going, uh-oh.
Well, he's a fellow Spartan, so.
Right?
Yeah, sorry, but the journal is cultural anthropology.
The Journal of Anthropology.
Yeah, and the person who's there is Daryl Lee.
Oh. Fortunately, he may be on a panel that I've organized at the AAAs, so and I'm in contact with him as well, and he's excellent. So yeah, if we can lean on him.
And Amal Bshara is there, so it has
Okay.
it has a number of people on the board. So so they might, and Sami Hermes is on the board.
Oh, cool. Okay.
So it might we might have.
Where is that out of? Where's it based? You know?
It's a US based, but I think, and it's public access, so anybody can access the articles.
Cool.
Very good.
One is saying it's closed, maybe is the wrong one. Journal of Anthropology, Hindawi.
No, it's called cultural anthropology.
Oh, cultural anthropology.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay. No, I'm sorry. I thought you said Journal of Anthropology. I don't know why.
No, cultural.
Cultural. Okay. Yeah, that's top tier in the disciplines.
Yeah. No, exactly. Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay.
So I just had one comment. Why it doesn't have to be either or. We could do. I do see that there is not that much literature out there on statelessness or really how in depth we have looked at it. So I do see the value of having a book and then maybe looking into journal thematic editions of the journal. So I think we should look at both. That's my hope. So I'm open to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Are you suggesting, Fahad, that we would publish the same articles in the journal as the book? Is that what you're suggesting?
Can we do that? Is that possible?
It does happen. Usually it's people do a special issue and then a press will publish the papers a second time in an edited volume.
Right.
But
yeah, my hope would be that we do have something in print as well. I mean, I do see the value of online journals. They have become the staple for research and everything, but there is definitely a value of having a print like a book form.
Sure. Yep, I agree.
I think Alyssa wanted to say something.
I want to put the link for the journal, but I can't.
Okay, yes. Yeah, actually, it's a strange situation. Maybe the easiest thing would be just to email, and then we'll circulate it among everyone.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Any other comments about publications before we move to final thoughts?
Well, I guess I just want to have a rough sense of a timeline. If we're going to think about publishing, and we send out an email to all of the participants and asking their, their preferences and so forth, and could we ask to get that back within a week, or
Yeah, actually, I would even say for such a simple question, it could even be 48 hours. Well,
Hmm.
actually, we have the weekend. Let's say, Tuesday or something.
Okay.
Because it's a very simple question. Do you want to
Yeah.
publish? What would you prefer to publish? A journal or an edited volume? And then the last question is, how soon do you think you could have it? 3 very simple questions. Shouldn't take that long to answer, so, because I
Alright.
found that oh, go ahead, Alyssa, I'm sorry.
I do want to add something in just now. I think it would be easier for many of us to answer that question if we knew a little bit more like what has been settled as the forum. I guess you probably want to know who will participate before deciding that. The other thing is that, like, for me personally, this is just a really chaotic time because I'm moving to Tunis on Sunday for 4 months for part of this fellowship that I'm in. Like, this week has just been like insanely crazy. I might personally need more than just the weekend. So if you all would indulge me, maybe extend that deadline just a little bit, because I won't be able to think about anything except physically moving myself from now until Sunday.
Yeah, absolutely. I should have listened to Najib. He was right. Yeah, you're right. And best wishes with the move.
Yes, definitely. Okay, so I mean, we could ask, whether you're interested in publishing first, and then second, what kind of publication, book versus journal article, and then if you have any suggestions as to where. We have a few suggestions already, but the main thing is are you with us, and where do you want to go, book or journal article? So if we could know that, say, within a week, and then based upon that, we can start to think about where exactly we want to target, and we can start to reach out to the editors and people that we might know, and maybe get something rolling. The last thing we really don't want to let it roll into the summer before we get anything done. That would be bad. So yeah, we will be a little bit pushy, just because that we have to be, I think.
I think Marwa has a hand up.
Yeah, as for you mentioned when we could get it into you by, I think that'll depend how much work each paper needs. And also I personally work better with being given a deadline because I can just sit on. I also ask my chairs to give me deadlines just so I can actually focus. So I think it would also be very dependent on those two things.
Thank you, Marwa. All right. I do want to give everyone an opportunity to give closing thoughts, but I just want to see if there's anything else regarding publications before we move to that final segment.
I think I've said what I need to say. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
All right, very good. Okay, well, why don't we move then to closing thoughts for those who haven't spoken yet. So we have a bunch of presenters with us here, and you don't have to, it doesn't have to be anything profound, just a final thought. So who would like to go first, or should I just go by the order I see here? No one would like to go first?
I go.
Okay, go for it.
This was really incredible because I don't actually find spaces to think about these issues. I'm in a Near and Middle Eastern Studies program, but I mean, personally, our cohorts are always like 2-3 people, more than half studying on Ottoman Empire. And I'm like, please, enough Ottoman Empire. There are other things in the world. So this was so beneficial for me. I'm very, very appreciative. I'm so happy to meet you. I hope we can do something productive together. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that. Who would like to go next?
I can go next, just briefly.
Yes.
You know, as a senior, I'm so thrilled to be here. I think my biggest takeaway from this whole 2 days was that we really need to globalize our education more. And I think in MSU, you know, in our classes, and because I learned so much about refugee life. So this is something that Muslim studies may think of, you know, as how can we make our DEI issues and all more global? And for me, that's, a really, really, I was telling Farah that I have students in my class who didn't know where Pakistan was. And I reduce their letter grade if they don't know where Pakistan is. So I learned so much about, and I think the most moving thing was somebody who mentioned the planting of jasmine in the camp so that they associate the children associate jasmine. I think that to me was the most profound sentence of this whole conference. So that was Professor Iqbal who said it, I think. So I'll just leave you there with my 2 cents here.
Very nice. Thank you, Dr. Singh. Anyone else who would like to go next?
I can go.
Yes, please.
My biggest takeaway was the multiple ways to approach this one topic, even just having this conversation about, which journal to, house it in, and the ways in which everyone had a very different way of talking about it, whether it was art or whether it was the mental health. And so I really appreciated, for someone, I very much focus always through gender. And so, but to hear the other ways and thinking about it, and at least for me, the biggest takeaway was a different way to approach religion, even the way we talk about religion. And, someone said something about, the fact of religion and resilience. And that was sort of, and the questioning that, does it actually? And that's also sort of interesting because you always sort of assume it as truth. And what if it's not, right? And so I thought a lot of the ways in which we were thinking about things, I really appreciated, and will definitely take it to the way that we approach writing the paper now, in a different way. So, and the politics of visibility versus invisibility, especially because we write about social media, right? And so if you're writing about social media and you're talking about what's making something visible and what's not, and how perhaps, again, thinking about it in ways that I didn't think about it before. So I appreciated that.
Great.
Thank you so much, Sabah. Other comments?
I could just jump in quickly. I was going to say that the focus of the conference as well, thinking about statelessness and displacement in particular. I think that often there's a way that conversations about refugees in Muslim contexts often kind of blur into broader discussions about different logics of humanitarianism and care. But then those broader conversations kind of take over, and the lens kind of shifts away from displacement per se. And so I guess just appreciating that not appreciating that kind of resisting that quick move to thinking more broadly, thinking about statelessness and all its different permutations, that itself kind of opens up to this vast range of of possibilities and permutations and so on. So I just wanted to note that staying with statelessness itself offers this whole range of ethnographic and historical context to think through. So thank you.
Absolutely, thank you.
I can go next.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I would like to thank everybody for this. When I saw the call for papers, I thought, oh, my work doesn't fit into the theme of the conference, because my work doesn't address Islam in a specific way. Yes, I work in Jordan, I worked in Lebanon, it doesn't worked on Palestinian communities before, but it did, the theme, it's the larger theme. And I really liked being in this, with this group, although it's on Zoom, which is a whole other story. But some of the papers addressed issues of, the mental health, the issues of statelessness, the resilience of the communities, issues of precarity, and some speakers looked at what's happening in other refugee communities, what might happen now with what's happening in other places. And these are Dr. Singh's paper about India. I really don't know what's happening like I watch the news, but I'm not aware that it's also dealing with the issues with the history. I didn't know that there is a rewriting of the history. I know that there is an oppression, like they are oppressing the communities, but not a rewriting of the history. This is scary. So I learned so much from learning about all of these experiences, and I really liked some of the reflexive approach, where especially the issues from the psychological, like the mental health perspective, where the speakers show vulnerability by sharing their own personal experiences. So it's a wide range of papers, and I really thought that's the strength of this group of papers in this conference, and I really like that. And it might make it difficult to publish them together, but that's the interdisciplinarity, and that's what made it more interesting and more engaging. Like, we're not sitting in hearing repetitive issues that the way it happens when we go to meetings in our fields. It's like, I know this. So thank you.
Yeah, that's a great observation. Actually, I felt the same way. I thought that was the best thing about the conference, is that you had this, they had all kinds of approaches, and you had people sharing their own reflections. And by the way, Asil, I should mention in the Q&A, you'll notice Dr. Khalida Zeki had some questions for you. And also Dr. Zeki has a question, how about adding an undergrad panel? And I'll say that actually when we had Tehran Painter, and I think the name was Danny, undergraduates who are involved in this, it was really nice. I thought it brought a lot of perspective. Thank you so much. Would others like to comment before we conclude? Yes, Alyssa.
Can I jump in there? Yeah. I just wanted to say, thank you to all of the presenters. I learned a lot from your papers. I really appreciated the very close ethnographic sensibility of some of the papers. And I think for me, what I will take away with most, or what resonated perhaps with me most, is some of the papers that really talked about, or had a really sophisticated way of theorizing displacement as a condition, a relational condition that has to do not so much with separation from a particular geography, but a kind of alienation from the self, or alienation from the community, and ways in which that plays out in kind of through the sensorium, through attachment to place, to religion. I really appreciated the kind of elaboration of the idea of otherness, whether that be Ghurba, or the idea of self-alienation, becoming other. That was a theme that I saw running through a lot of many of the different papers, and something that I really appreciated. So
thank you so much, Alyssa. Other comments? Going once? Going twice? All right. Well, I don't want to put anybody on the spot, so we'll leave it at that. I'd like to again thank you all. Thank you so much to our conference, the individuals who proposed the conference theme again and who organized this. Dr. Farha Abbasi, Professor Najib Hourani, Professor Linda Sayed. I want to thank Mary Ferdowsi, our administrative lead, for doing everything basically. And I want to thank you all for your excellent contributions. This was a very stimulating conference. We have recorded the sessions. And if you don't want us to post it, we won't, but otherwise we will post these on our YouTube page. That's it. Thank you, everyone, and we'll be in touch.
Mohammed, will there be links from the program website, or
to the YouTube page? We could do that. That's a good idea. Yeah, that's a good idea. I mean, in any case, we can circulate the links among you all. But yeah, having it on the website, it's a good idea.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it was a pleasure meeting those of you who I have not met. Wonderful to see those of you who I have. Thank you very
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.